Hello.
Um,
It's nice to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Um, Tell me about the first job you ever had.
The first job I ever had, it probably was babysitting, child care. And I may have been, 15.
I do a lot of that.
Yeah, 15. And there were people in the neighborhood. I mean, no one in my exact neighborhood, but close by. And I would go over and take care of their children. One little boy whose father was in the military. It was during the war. And so I would go over there. And another friend of my mother's who had a child and a baby, and I didn't know much about babies. I had no child care experience. So I fortunately was, I think, I was careful. I don't know if I was the best babysitter in the world, but it was,
I'm not either.
but I was trustworthy and I was conscientious.
Yes.
And that's what I did first.
Thank you. Describe the house or city that you grew up in.
I lived in I was born in a little town called Eatonbrook, which was a mill town up towards Mount Rainier. And I lived there for a couple of years. Then we moved to Tacoma. And see, it was during the Depression, and people, my family, had to find a job where they could get one. So we lived in Seattle and Queen Anne Hill in a Depression brick house, apartment. Then we lived in Tacoma, and we ended up in Lakewood, which is where I really spent from the time I was second grade until I graduated from high school. So, and it was early suburban. I mean, it was really country, but there were lakes, and also Fort Lewis was not far away. So there was a combination of people, and I don't think anybody was really poor, and there were a few rich people in the neighborhood, but most of them went to a private school. And they were summer homes, and everybody else I went to a little grade school called Park Lodge, and there were at top during the war, there were 100 in 6th grades.
Wow.
So, well, it's about like your school.
Yeah.
Small. And the only report card we got at the end of the year was a little folded blue piece of paper that said Park Lodge School, and that you passed from the 3rd grade to the 4th grade, or the 5th grade to the 6th grade, or whatever it was. And things I remember I remember walking to school, because we walked to school, walked through the backyards. I mean, there were several houses, almost like Indianola, that weren't occupied. They were summer houses. But coming down through the backyards and across a little creek called Ponce de Leon, where you kind of dance across the stones. It probably was about this wide. It seemed like a river, but and then there were beautiful deer tongues. Anyway, I walked to school, and I walked by myself because there was no one going that way. And anyway, to the school that I remember my 3rd grade, I had a teacher with 2nd and 3rd combination, and she was, we had to sing, and we had to learn the do, re, mi, fa, and F, A, C, E, and then we sang those before we could sing the lyrics. And that was really memorable to me. And then the teacher I had for the 4th grade was wonderful. And I had her again for the 6th grade because she moved up to be principal because her mother retired. And her name was Miss Trickler. Yeah, I can remember that. And, but what was wonderful about that class, because she was a great teacher, is that if we had a little bit of time before we had to go to recess or whatever, she played math games. And I can't do it, but she'd say, 4 times 7 minus 3, and how she could do that.
Oh goodness.
Yeah, I mean, it was.
You do that.
Yeah, it was, I mean, and I don't know if she had them written down, or, anyway, her brain was good. And in that little school, we ate lunch in the basement. We all brought our lunch, and I had I always brought either probably a tuna fish sandwich or a bologna sandwich. Pretty much that would be that, and an apple, and milk, and probably a cookie. And you ate some of us ate some of our lunch at recess. And then we just went out and played on the, for recess lunch, played on the grounds, and it was simple but fun. Okay.
What were some of your favorite bands and the first records that you owned?
Oh my gosh. Well, I was the era of Frank Sinatra and Harry James and Jimmy Dorsey and Glenn Miller and all those wonderful bands through the 40s and into the 50s. And I like music. And, we all danced, went to school dances. We had a friend who had a basement and a record player, and we all girls got together after school and danced in the basement. And anyway, but I had a friend who really had a Harry James fan club. I mean, and she was really serious about it. But that's going to be probably about 9th grade. So grade school, there was nothing. I mean, I don't know if he had a record player, and I'm not sure many people had. One friend had a record player, and I'm not sure anybody else did. They had a radio.
Yeah.
I mean, listened to the radio programs together. I mean, not with your friends, with your family, or at night in your bedroom by yourself. And but anyway, Harry James was very big in that. And then, of course, Glenn Miller. I mean, that was swooning dance music. If there was a boy you liked, or even if it wasn't a boy you liked. And everybody jitterbugged, and it was fun and simple.
Yeah. What was better or worse about life in America when you were growing up as compared to now?
Well, my life was really simple, and it was, I say it was simple. I don't know if my parents' life was so simple, because my father was gone for 2.5 years during the Second World War. So my mother was fixing the plumbing and doing what she had to do to keep her family together. And the Northwest was, we didn't have a great variety of people. I mean, they really were white people. And there were, as a small child, there were Japanese markets on Pacific Highway. And we always got Japanese oranges at Christmas. And there were Japanese people out in the Fife Valley farming. And so that was different from now. And I think that was, and life was just simpler.
Yeah. And what did things cost when you were young, like gas and bread?
I don't know. You could buy I'm thinking about this because, I don't know, I'm thinking about candy bar. Probably cost 5 cents, but it was probably a pretty big candy bar. And there was penny candy. Then I used to walk home from school with a pal, and then we'd stop at the grocery store and buy Hostess cupcakes, and each eat one, or a Twinkie, and they were pretty big, and the cupcake was about little like that. Yeah. I can't imagine it cost more than 15 cents, but I don't remember. And I don't know what it cost you at the movies. I don't know.
Tell me about a time that you got in trouble when you were young.
Ooh, let me see. Well, this wasn't particularly trouble, but I was probably determined about doing something, and the rule was you didn't go to the movies the middle of the week. Okay. Well, there was a movie I really wanted to see, and I begged right up until the time of the show. Finally, my mother said, no, it's a school night, you're not going. So I just pounced, and it was 7 o'clock. I said, well, I didn't want to go anyway. And I don't think I've got, I wasn't a goody-goody, but I don't think anybody got particularly in trouble.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I mean,
describe your first car.
my first car?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't have a first car until, you mean my own first car?
Or the first car that you were able to use?
It was during the war, and my mother tried to teach me to drive, and she tried a couple times, and she said, no, we're not going to do this. And so, we walked and rode bicycles, and then when I was a senior, one friend got a car. But none of us drove. I mean, she drove, and I'm not sure who else had a license.
Yeah.
Maybe, but anyway, so my first car, I didn't really get a driver's license until I was out of college and teaching school, and Don McCroskey, I was going with Don McCroskey, your great-grandfather. Anyway, and so he taught me to drive, and he'd bought a new car with an automatic shift, and so we went to the State Patrol to get a license, and he said, we're going to go just before they close, because that way there's traffic, there won't be a lot. There was never much traffic, and this was in Olympia, but they'll want to go home, so they probably won't make you parallel park. So I did my driving test, and they didn't make me parallel park.
That's smart.
Yeah. It was a conniver.
Yeah.
Okay.
Describe a typical date you had when you were young.
Well, probably went to a dance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you'd go to a dance with a group, and there would be 3 couples in a car. Probably that's it. You go to the dance. This was, I must have been close to I would have been a junior or senior in high school. And then we'd probably go to the XXX, big deal, which is in South Tacoma, and it was big. And they would either come to the car, or you could go in. And then after the dance, you'd probably have a hamburger or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. And I can remember one night, because I was not going to park, but the car was going to go park, and they drove. We lived in the neighborhood, and it was a few miles, about 3 miles, to Western State Hospital, and there was a nice, quiet, dark road that went right down to a stream, and so that's where the car was going to park, where people could neck. But I was not interested in the boy that much, so we got out of the car and just walked around, and then turned around, and we weren't locked in Western State. So.
What were some rules around your household growing up?
I don't know if there are rules or just were expectations.
Mm-hmm.
He helped a little bit. I was not burdened with housework, and you were always there for dinner. There wasn't any place else to be, and you ate politely, you know, and ate, and we always had dinner, and we had breakfast together, and I think it was just, I suppose the rules would be at certain times when to be home.
Yeah.
And I can't think of anything.
And then fast forward to, tell me what my dad was like when he was a kid.
Your father. Well, I have a lovely story. You know, he didn't have a name for 2 months. And we were going to call him Dean Houston McCroskey, because that was after my dad and a favorite uncle of Don's, his dad's, and just before he was born, my brother was killed, who was called Dean. So Robert was born, and so we just called him Dean, because my mother, we still planned to call him Dean Houston, and my mother just had found it too difficult. So we just thought, well, in a couple months she'll change her mind. But she didn't change her mind. So we called him Robert Donald McCroskey Jr. And someone said, it took you 2 months to do that? And what was he like? He was, I think he very quietly did what he wanted to do. If he didn't want to eat something, he would eat it, and then he would say he needed to go to the bathroom, where he would spit it out. He was, I think, not physically abusive to his sisters, but I think he was verbally abusive. I understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that, but I have heard that he probably could be that way.
I know he feels bad for being so mean to them.
Yeah.
Shoot a Peggy.
I think it's Peggy.
Yeah.
I think he said, I've heard that. And I probably started very early, because I can remember him, Peggy was new and in a basket, and she started to cry, and I went in, and Robert was leaning over, and he said, well, I just wanted to see if she'd cry if I pinched her. And so
Oh, goodness.
but I think he was, I didn't have to worry about his schoolwork particularly, but then we also weren't concerned about everybody getting straight A's. We expected people to do their work, and things were not as competitive. And he had a great group of boys that he played with in the backyards, and I think that he was, I think if he kept a low threshold, low profile, he could do almost anything he wanted, and probably did.
Yeah.
Because he had a paper route from the time he was, I like this, from about 10, 12, probably that. And he had a man who wasn't paying him, and the boys would go back, and they were all happened to be boys doing the paper route. And he would, and the man would say, well, come back. So Don, his father, who was a salesman, said to him, Robert, you go and say to him very nicely and politely, you say, if I do not get my payment, I'm not going to deliver your paper. Well, he got his payment. And so I didn't have any trouble with that. So
Yeah.
anyway. And I think also Robert was fortunate, and he spent some really nice time with his grandfather, and Hayne, and it was, I think it was probably nice for both of them. I don't know, but I would think so.
How have you raised your kids differently than your parents raised you?
Well, we've probably probably had more money. I mean, not a lot of money, but probably more, but I didn't want for anything. We did more things, and of course we started coming to Indianola in the summer, which was, so we were gone from the city. So, and the kids skied, and actually I skied a little bit as a kid. We didn't ski because the war was on really, but so, and I think there was, we didn't eat out a lot, but we ate out more than my family ate out. You know, Dick's was around with Seattle, and a swell Mexican restaurant, and a Chinese restaurant in the neighborhood, and we didn't eat a lot, but we did do that. So, and I probably had more expectations than my mother did.
Yeah. This is a long question.
Yeah.
What do you think about the increasing importance of a college education and the increasing difficulty to get into college from when you were younger and then from your kids went and now your grandchildren?
Well, I think it's a really difficult time now. There's so much emphasis on it, and it puts so much emphasis on the student. I think a college education is what the student puts into it. That's so simplistic, but I'm sure that if you're going to an Ivy school, it may give you a little bit of leg up on a job, but I don't know how much better educated you are. You might be, I mean, but I was going to UPS right up until, I'd signed up and I stayed home. I didn't work that summer, and I was just babysitting occasionally, and it got to be July, and, we're feeling Jack.
Okay.
Anyway, it got to be July, and my mother just must have had enough of me, and she said, I think it'd be nice if you went to WSU.
Hey.
So I went to WSU all by myself. Hi, honey.
Hey,
Hi.
how's it going?
Good. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
This is in the door.
I'm having an interview.
You guys are going to
Excuse
interview
us.
Sorry.
Sorry, is it even permitted?
Yeah.
Hey, babe, Lene.
What was your reaction to the civil rights movement and as it was happening?
You mean the originals? I mean, well, I was a college student. Oh, no, I wasn't. I was older than that. And we tend to be in our, a family fairly liberal in our politics. So I think, well, I don't think, I know that it was a movement that we would have supported.
Yeah. And how afraid were people at the time of the nuclear war with the Soviets, and how did you deal with that fear during the Cold War?
The Cold War, oh,
Yeah.
okay. The Cold War, and we thought, now, shall we get a bomb shelter? Now, some people built a bomb shelter, not many. And so, you were to put supplies in your basement, as we are to do now for an earthquake, for emergency. And so I put some food down and some bottles of water and some books for the children, and I think it ended up about, 6 cans of tuna fish, and it was a very weak effort. And my neighbors across the street they moved, but they had stored all of their gin bottles with water, their old gin bottles. So anyway, we didn't make much of an effort. I know there was someone in our neighborhood who built a bomb shelter. That's the only one I know of. And I knew of someone in Tacoma. Now, I'm sure there were more than that,
Yeah.
but that's all I knew.
And what do you remember about the day Kennedy was killed?
Oh, I remember that very vividly. I was taking care of another child, and it was the whole weekend. It wasn't a day, it was a whole weekend. And heard the news because I listened to the radio, and when my friend returned to pick up her child, we were, you were aghast, and we were going out to a WSU party that night because it was the Washington WSU game, and we went, but people were, they were not paralyzed. It was unbelievable. And then, watching it all weekend and seeing Ruby shot in front of your eyes, I mean, it was a very powerful weekend.
And what do you remember about the day that Martin Luther King Jr. was killed?
Well, that is not as, because I have so many other things to put that other weekend. Horror, again, probably not as overwhelming as the President of the United States. And he wasn't my religious leader so I think it wasn't as powerful a feeling, and aghast for the movement and for the family, but again, not as powerful as Kennedy.
And what was your opinion of the Vietnam War as it was happening, and did that opinion change over time?
Well, we didn't have anybody, any men that age. We did have some cousins, and of course they were in college, so there was not too much problem about that. And I think that those boys might have gone to Canada. I'm not sure. And I think in retrospect it was, people didn't like it, but in retrospect it was a war that those men who fought, and there were many, and they didn't get the accolade, they didn't get the credit for what they were doing, because it was a very unpopular war, and those men were doing all they could, and it should never have been fought.
Describe your memory of the day America landed on the moon.
I'm sorry, I don't remember that particularly. I wish I did. I've never been off. It was grand. Sure, watching the television, always involved in that. But I can't tell you when it was or anything like that. And I might be able to if my brain weren't so old, but I don't know.
And what did you think when you first heard about the Watergate scandal?
Well, I was not a Nixon fan, so I'm sure it was all true.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure it was, and I don't, in retrospect, it may not be worse than a lot of things that happened. It was just I'm happy for Mr. Nixon that he handled it so pretty.
And tell me about your experience on 9/11. This is the last question.
Oh, well, I was with Grandma Hecht, and she had just come home from the hospital and was in her apartment, and I was sleeping on the couch and she was in bed, and the telephone rang, and it was Nancy from the Midwest saying what had happened. And so, then the television was on, and just unbelievable horror.
That's it.
Oh,
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you for letting me interview you.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm delighted to have been able to. I must say, I wasn't I'm a second choice, and I'm sorry I was second. I mean, I was glad I could be second choice. I'm sorry that
Well, thank you for
because
helping.